The rain poured like a flood that night, washing over the cracked highway and blurring the world into a haze of headlights and shadows. Inside the dimly lit biker bar on the edge of town, laughter echoed off the wooden walls, rough voices mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and classic rock coming from the old jukebox. The men inside, tough, tattooed, and clad in leather, were used to chaos, but none of them were prepared for what happened when the door suddenly burst open. A woman stumbled in, drenched from head to toe, her hair sticking to her face, her hands trembling violently as she clutched her swollen belly. Tears streamed down her cheeks, streaking through the dirt and blood that marked her skin. The entire bar fell silent. Even the jukebox seemed to stop mid-song. For a few seconds, all anyone could hear was the ragged sound of her breathing, the faint thunder outside, and the faint jingle of the bar door closing behind her. She fell to her knees right there in the middle of the floor. "Please!" she gasped, her voice breaking. "Someone help me. They're after me. If you believe in kindness, in the power of second chances, and in doing what's right even when it's hard," pause for a moment and like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because what happened next will remind you that goodness can come from the most unexpected places. The men exchanged glances, unsure what to do. At the center of them stood their leader, Duke, an aging, broad-shouldered man with gray in his beard and a past filled with more mistakes than memories. He'd led the Disciples, a once feared biker club that had long since left the dark road behind. These days, they rode not for crime or power, but for redemption. Yet old reputations die hard. Most people in town still crossed the street when they saw them. Duke stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing against the floor. The woman flinched when he reached out a hand. He stopped. "You're safe here," he said quietly, his deep voice cutting through the tension. But she didn't believe him. Not yet. She was shaking so hard she could barely speak. When Duke crouched beside her, he noticed bruises on her wrists, a split lip, and a wedding ring still clinging to her swollen finger. Her name, as they would learn later, was Emily. She was 7 months pregnant, and tonight she had run for her life. She had once lived just a few miles away in a small trailer with her husband, Mark, a man everyone thought was charming, hardworking, and devoted. But behind closed doors, Mark was a monster. The abuse had started quietly, angry words, small outbursts, controlling behavior. Then came the bruises, the broken plates, and the locked doors. Emily had endured it all in silence, convincing herself things would change. But tonight, when he came home drunk and raging, something inside her broke. He'd accused her of lying, of trying to leave him. Then he'd hit her, harder than ever before. She fell against the coffee table, clutching her stomach in fear for the baby's life. When he stepped outside to grab another beer, she grabbed her coat, fled barefoot into the storm, and just ran. No direction, no plan, only instinct. The biker bar's neon sign had been the first light she saw in miles. Inside, as Duke and his men gathered around her, she told them enough to make every jaw in that room clench in silent fury. These were men who had seen darkness up close, but the thought of a pregnant woman being beaten struck something deep within them. Duke called for blankets and hot tea. One of the younger bikers, Benny, brought out his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Emily's tears kept coming, but the warmth and strange safety of the place began to calm her trembling hands. For the first time in years, she felt like someone was actually listening. Duke made a few quiet phone calls. Within an hour, the local sheriff, a friend who owed him more than one favor, was on the way. But Duke knew it wouldn't be enough. Men like Mark didn't stop easily. If Emily went back home, she'd be back in danger before morning. So Duke made a decision that would change all of their lives. "You stay here tonight," he said. "Ain't nobody gonna touch you while you're under this roof." That night, the bar became her fortress. The bikers took turns keeping watch by the doors. Emily slept in a back room, wrapped in borrowed blankets, the sound of rain outside mixing with the low rumble of motorcycles parked like sentinels around the building. When dawn came, Sunlight poured through the blinds, revealing faces that had once looked intimidating but now held something softer: compassion, purpose. Emily awoke to the smell of coffee and pancakes. Duke's wife, Mary, had arrived early to help. She cleaned Emily's wounds, offered her clothes, and spoke to her like a sister. For the first time in months, Emily smiled. A small, fragile smile, but real. Meanwhile, Duke gathered the club members. They knew Mark would come looking for her, and they were ready. Sure enough, just before noon, a pickup truck came tearing down the road, kicking up gravel as it stopped outside the bar. Mark stumbled out, red-faced and angry, shouting Emily's name. Inside, she froze. Duke stood, his shadow towering in the doorway, calm but unyielding. "You need to turn around," he said. Mark sneered, thinking he could intimidate him. But when the other bikers stepped out from the booths and lined up behind Duke, 10 men in black leather, eyes cold and steady, Mark's voice faltered. "She's my wife," he barked. Duke didn't blink, not anymore. For a tense few moments it felt like time had stopped. Mark looked from one face to another, realizing these men weren't afraid of him. He took a step back, muttering curses, then got in his truck and sped off. The roar of his engine faded into silence. Emily broke down in tears. All the fear, pain, and exhaustion came pouring out. Duke didn't say a word, he just let her cry. He knew what it was. Like to hit rock bottom, to feel trapped in a nightmare you can't escape. Once, long ago, he'd been the kind of man he now despised. But people had given him a second chance, and that's why he couldn't turn her away. Over the next few weeks, Emily stayed in the small apartment above the bar. The bikers became her protectors, her family. They helped her find a lawyer, press charges, and start over. When she went to court, half the biker club rode behind her in a line of motorcycles stretching down the street, silent, powerful, united. Mark didn't even show up to the final hearing. Months passed, and winter melted into spring. Emily gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Hope. When she brought Hope to the bar for the first time, the men, these once feared bikers, took turns holding the tiny infant with hands that had once known only violence. Benny built her a handmade crib. Mary hosted a baby shower right there in the bar, complete with pink balloons and laughter echoing off the walls. Duke, standing in the corner, watched it all quietly. He felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He'd lost count of the mistakes he'd made in his life, but helping Emily reminded him that redemption wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. It lived in choices, small, quiet acts of decency that could rewrite even the darkest past. One summer evening, Emily walked out to where the bikers were polishing their bikes before a charity ride. She placed a hand on Duke's arm and said, "You saved my life." Duke shook his head. "No, sweetheart, you saved your own. We just gave you a place to catch your breath." He handed her a small leather patch embroidered with the word family. "You've earned this," he said softly. Tears welled up in her eyes again. She hugged him, whispering a thank you that seemed to hold every emotion words couldn't capture. The next day, Emily and baby Hope moved into a small apartment in town, close enough that she could still visit. She started volunteering at a women's shelter, using her story to help others escape abuse. And every weekend, a line of motorcycles would pull up outside her building, their engines rumbling like a promise that she'd never be alone again. In a world where cruelty often hides behind smiles and help seems so far away, sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. A woman who ran for her life found her angels not in suits or uniforms, but in leather vests and roaring engines. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still exists and that even the roughest souls can carry the brightest light, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Let's keep spreading stories that remind the world there's still good out there. Before you go, tell us in the comments, do you believe people can truly change if given a second chance? Because in that little biker bar on the edge of nowhere, one woman's tears turned into hope, and one broken club found their redemption in saving her. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of story the world needs to remember.